What we done started. Look at what we done started. This the people party.
Peace and love, party people in the place to be. It's the BKMC, the MCEO, Talib Kweli. Today, we are rocking with a very special episode of People's Party, the world's best podcast. And as always, and as usual, I have the lovely and talented and thoughtful and thought-provoking Jasmin Leigh in the place to be. How you feeling, Jasmin? What's going on?
You know what, Talib? I'm feeling business in the front and party on the sleeves, baby.
That's a good way to feel. Because this is the people's party.
Yes, it is.
And partying is very important. But before we party, we got to talk about the people.
Hey, you got a people.
That's right. And today's guest is a perfect guest, in my estimation, for the people's party. Because this is someone who is out there representing for the people. Today's guest is a politician, a social worker, who spent 6 years in the California State Assembly, the last 2 of which she was the House Speaker. She grew up in the Venice Fairfax area of Los Angeles. Shout out to Alexander Hamilton High School. This is an area that she still represents today in the United States House of Representatives. The very first African-American woman in the United States to serve as Speaker of any state legislature, and serves today on the House Committee on Foreign Affairs, where she is chair of the subcommittees on Africa, global health, and global human rights. She also serves on the House Judiciary Subcommittee on Crime and Terrorism, where she has helped pass sweeping criminal justice reforms like the First Step Act and helped pass the Equality Act of 2020. Our guest has also served as the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, the CBC, in 2019 and 2020, where united with Congressional Hispanic, Asia Pacific Islander, and Native American caucuses, she demanded a targeted response to the pandemic and initiated a national needs assessment for communities of color, and also introduced the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. She's currently a candidate in the race for mayor for the city of Los Angeles. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for the first sitting congressperson to join the People's Party, Karen Bass, in the place to be.
Yeah!
In the place to be.
Hey.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Karen Bass.
That's me.
How are you, Karen Bass?
I'm doing just fine. How about you?
Good. It is good to see you. It's good to meet you.
Thank you. Same here.
Thank you for being on our show. Thank you for gracing us with your time and your energy.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. It's my honor.
Yes, it's our honor to have you. And this is different for us because this is the first. Is this the first politician?
Yeah, the actual politician, future, mayor of Los Angeles.
Like not someone who just talks about politics.
Nah, she's actually out there doing it.
Like actually a politician.
I'm in the middle of it.
Yeah, okay. Well, first of all, I want to say that your campaign is very grassroots. Mm-hmm. And I want to quote you. You said, it's not the power of the dollar, it's the power of the people.
Power of the people, that's right.
I want to give you an opportunity to shout out your supporters, the coalitions and the cultures that have helped you build.
Absolutely. Well, my background, a good part of my life has been as an activist and as an organizer. Mm-hmm. And so running for office, has been the last part of my life. But we've had so many different organizations and individuals that have supported this campaign. And now that we're past the primary and get to go to the general, I'm looking forward to really expanding the grassroots involvement and bringing together labor, community, the faith community, building a coalition across race, class, ethnicity, geography, and ideology.
Yes, indeed. Now, you referenced your activist work, and
yes.
That's where you got your start. You were here in Los Angeles when LA's crack epidemic happened, mm-hmm. and you formed COCO, which is how people affectionately know it as, mm-hmm. the Community Coalition, mm-hmm. In your living room, right, in 1990? Yep. Why did you feel the need to spring into action in that way?
So, you know what? I was so concerned in the 80s when crack hit and the Crips and the Bloods, the violence was off the hook. And to me, crack cocaine was a health issue. And the violence, frankly, was a health issue as well. It was social, it was an economic issue. And the only thing that politicians and other policymakers were doing was passing sentencing laws to incarcerate people. So to me, it was criminalizing a health issue. Now, we didn't use the term mass incarceration, but it was obvious that that's what was going to happen. So at the time when it started, I was actually working at USC Medical School. I was on the faculty, and I was taking students and training them how to work in the emergency room. And I walked away from all of that to try to build an organization that would push back and fight against what would eventually be mass incarceration.
I guess the CDC recently talked about the health effects of racism, didn't they?
That's right, absolutely. And I was also acutely aware of that from the medical perspective,
Right.
because I saw it. I saw it in action.
Your dad was from Texas and you used to watch civil rights movements on TV with him and discuss with him. Do you think back to those conversations and as we still face some of those same problems today?
Absolutely. And, he didn't mean to shape me into being involved in politics.
Right.
But that was the result of it. I mean, watching TV with him and listening to him, and he was a part of that wave of migration of people escaping the South, escaping essentially apartheid. And so coming to Los Angeles and knowing what people were fighting for in the civil rights movement, and maybe we didn't have overt Jim Crow laws here in LA to the extent that they did in the South, but the institutional racism, the systemic racism was very clear.
Now, you were inspired very early at age 14, right, to get into politics. You volunteered for Bobby Kennedy?
That's right. I signed up my mother to be a precinct captain, but I went and did the actual door knocking. But, I kind of view politics a little differently, maybe. To me, elected office is just one sector. Politics is much broader than that. So the majority of my life, since I was 14, I made a decision because of my dad and because of what was happening in the whole world. I made a decision at a very young age that I wanted to spend my life continuing the fight, that I saw the young people, they were old to me at the time, but the young people in the civil rights protests.
We wanted to extend our love to you and your family because it couldn't have been easy losing your daughter and son-in-law in a car crash back in 2006. And you have talked about your solidarity with President Biden and understanding how he feels. How does that pain prepare you to emphasize with the American people, and what do you carry on from their memory?
Well, the main thing I carry on from their memory is that, my daughter was right on the verge. Both of them had just graduated college, just starting off life. And she was very committed to becoming an activist and wanting to fight for social and economic justice. And so, just how she led her life and how she was preparing to lead her life, absolutely I carry with me. And knowing, even though it's still very, very, very painful, that's a pain that never goes away. It never does. Time, when people tell you time makes all the difference, it doesn't. But knowing that she would have full expectations that I would carry on helps give me strength. And in terms of empathizing with Americans and Angelenos, absolutely. Anybody that's experienced a loss, a couple that I know recently lost their son, and we all reach out to each other when someone loses a child, because that's a different type of loss.
Right.
And we always say that, you're now in the club that you didn't ask to be a part of. So to me, one of the ways you deal with the grieving is reaching out to other people that are going through that and making sure that you're there for them.
Right. And when you were bringing up your daughter, did you just simply watch or have her come and watch you, or did you actually sit down and okay, this is what you should be doing with activism and things?
Well, never what she should be doing, because she has to decide that on her own, but absolutely it was a part of her DNA. I remember when she was 2 years old, taking her to her first protest. It was protesting the South African embassy, because it was a part of the fight against apartheid. So she grew up with politics all around her and people all around her. So, but you never push a child. You always want them to decide themselves. But we had numerous discussions about society, understanding it, the analysis that you need to have to understand what's going on in the world around you. So she was quite equipped with politics.
Yes, I need to put that on a post-it. Don't push Coco.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I truly appreciate it. I also, my first memories of activism in my household, my mother was a member of NOW, I think it was called.
Oh, sure. National Organization of Women.
Yeah, National Organization of Women, right. Very, very, very anti-apartheid. Listening to a lot of Desmond Tutu and stuff like that back in the day.
So see, that's what I was doing. I mean, when you asked me before Coco, so my day job was teaching, but in the evening and on the weekends, I was running an anti-apartheid organization called the Southern Africa Support Committee.
Now, my mother Dr. Brenda Green, she's a lifelong Democrat. And the Democrats overwhelmingly get the black vote every time. So you're a Democrat, and the right wing, in my estimation, has been very successful at convincing voters that the GOP is the party of traditional values, which many people equate as morality and principles and stuff like that, as if you can only be a morally sound person if you vote for the GOP. People float this talking point a lot. The Democrats started the KKK, and they don't acknowledge that today's KKK hates Democrats, and today's conservatives march with the KKK to save Confederate statues. So I wanted to see if you could break down for us Southern strategy and how conservatives are always conservatives and progressives or liberals are always progressive liberals, no matter what the name of the party is.
Right. Well, you know what? I think that in our history, we've had to fight for everything. We've had to fight to be in unions. We've had to fight for jobs. And we've had to fight the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party was filled with bigots. And we need to be clear about that. It's kind of funny because my Republican colleagues always raise this with us. And they say things like, well, you know, you really should thank the GOP because it was the GOP that freed you guys from slavery. It's like, give me a break. You know, so we fought. Fannie Lou Hamer fought the Democratic Party to change that. But what you're referring to when you say the Southern strategy is what President Johnson knew was going to happen the minute he signed the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act. He knew that the bigots in the Democratic Party were going to flee. And they did. They went over to the Republican Party, and they've been there ever since. And so I think that a political party is not a panacea. We still have to push in the Democratic Party to make sure that they represent our needs. So our struggle never stops.
That's right. That's right.
One thing, though, is that there are no liberals in the Republican Party anymore. I mean, the Republican Party has been seized by an extremist element. Yeah. And that element, basically, there's the Republican Party, there used to be a spectrum. There is not any longer.
Yeah, I mean, another criticism, because we're in meme culture, right? So people say Democrats started the KKK and this is a meme and there's no type of nuanced discussion about it. People say that the two parties are the same bird, just left wing and right wing. And it's like, well, that's true. That statement is, you could make a valid case for that statement, but that ignores what you just said, which is that the Democrats, for all their flaws, make space in that tent for progressives. Right. And there are people who are anti-racist and people who are activists who can align with Democrats on certain issues. And the right wing, they make space in the tent for Nazis.
Right.
That's how I feel about it.
Well, you are absolutely right. I mean, that's part of being seized by a right-wing element that has taken over the party now. So, but within the Democratic Party, there is definitely a spectrum. Yeah. You know, there is the left in the Democratic Party, there's the moderates, and then there's the conservatives.
Well, let me ask you this. So we talked about how Republicans make space for certain elements, but they push their fringe elements to the forefront. And the party gets pushed more right. And it makes trying to make their agenda seem more moderate. Well, in my estimation, Democrats almost seem to demonize members of in their party who are a bit more radical. So you got Proud Boys joining school boards and running for local offices. And Democrats sometimes can come across as too pragmatic, too willing to compromise. As someone who prides herself as being able to work across the aisle, what's your take on this criticism?
Well, I think that there's truth to the criticism. I mean, the way it's being played out right now is so when President Biden gets elected and he puts forward nominees, ambassadors, for example, the Republicans are literally holding those ambassadors. They're not allowing them to be confirmed. Now, when Trump was in office, the Senate objected to all of his nominees, but they never blocked any of them. To tell you the truth, I didn't realize you could do that until now. In hindsight, we should have blocked a number of them. Especially the wackos that became cabinet secretaries whose mission was to destroy the agency they were in charge of. So I think that that's an example because Democrats are always trying to color between the lines, always trying to govern and be proper, and then we get our butts kicked. So, you know, there are instances when I think that we could be more aggressive, but I am pragmatic too, because the bottom line is I'm trying to get something done for my people. And when I was an activist, that was when I could take a stand and it didn't matter whether or not it really happened. When you're in a position of governing, you got to help somebody. I can't use my position as a member of Congress to protest. I got to deliver.
Now, many black folks criticize more mainstream black politicians like Barack Obama, Kamala Harris, for not doing enough to specifically address black people. And their defenders would say, well, they're leaders of the whole nation, not just of one demographic, and they must act accordingly. While you were Majority Whip, you did a State of Black California address. Is it a black politician's responsibility to do that? And as mayor, would you do a State of Black California address for the city of Los Angeles?
I don't know. I might do a State of Black Los Angeles.
Right.
You know, yes, I thought that was a very important thing to do because we have very specific issues. I mean, you know, the reason why I decided to leave Congress, and it wasn't an easy reason. I'm walking away from the foreign policy work I do on Africa, which I love. But our people are dying on these streets. I mean, we're 9% of Los Angeles and 40% of the people in the tents. And several of them don't wake up every morning. I mean, 2,000 died last year. So there are some very particular needs and issues that black people have. I don't have a problem leading the entire city and saying black folks have issues. I mean, black folks have issues with jobs, for example. So you can get all the resources in the world for jobs, but if you don't have a focus to make sure black folks get hired, then we're not going to get the jobs.
Right.
Exactly.
You can do both.
You were in the Capitol on January 6th, and you went live on IG during the insurrection, and you actually had to take down your post because the military said that MAGA watchers were hunting down Democrats. This was clearly white supremacist terrorism.
That's right.
And what can you share about that day with us?
Well, you know, people ask me, was I afraid? And I think I was too angry to be afraid.
The shock.
I mean, I was just furious because you just imagine for 1 second if those had been black folks.
Right.
And then, you know, when I go to the Capitol, people were saying to me, my family especially, was, are you going to go to work on January 6th? You know, all that stuff is going to happen. I was like, yeah, I'm in the safest place in the country. I'll be in the Capitol. I just won't be on the streets, because it was interesting talking to black folks in D.C. before January 6th. And people were like, not a day to be roaming around.
Right.
Because we viewed it as a white supremacist rally. And but it turns out that, you know, I was actually in the most unsafe place.
Right.
And the other thing that made me mad was I had just missed them by 10 minutes. If I had left, because I left the gallery to do a Zoom call. If I had left 10 minutes later, I literally would have run into them in the hallway. And then your mind goes to, you know what? They were looking for people to lynch.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's why they had the gallows up there.
Yeah.
And then they killed a cop, and then afterwards, 3 Capitol Police officers committed suicide just because they were so traumatized.
Right.
Yeah, so
And
much for
I
Blue Lives
view
Matter.
them as that being connected. Sometimes people like to disconnect it. I do not disconnect it. And by the way, over 100 officers were injured, and some of them severely injured. Some of them have never been able to come back to work.
I call myself, I've been functionally homeless. You cite homelessness as LA's #1 problem,
That's
and I
right.
would have to agree with you. Can you lay out your solution for what you're going to do?
Sure, absolutely. Well, first of all, I view what is happening on our streets as an emergency.
For sure.
That is not being treated like an emergency. So I would treat it like an earthquake. When there is an earthquake, everybody comes to the table. You don't sit there and fill out 25-page applications to do things. You just get it done. I remember when we had the earthquake here, we rebuilt the 10 freeway in record time because everybody stopped what they were doing. That's what I think needs to happen. So I would declare a state of emergency on day one. A state of emergency that the mayor can call is not enough. We have to involve the federal, state, county, and city government. And one thing that I bring to the table that's a little different is that I have deep relationships on every level of government. One of the areas of dysfunction that we've had in LA is that the city and the county do not work hand in glove. Okay. And I think that they absolutely have to. We have to get people off the streets immediately, but then we also have to address why they wound up homeless to begin with. You know, was it just economic reason? Do they just need, first and last month's rent? Is it a veteran? Is it a former foster youth that aged out of the system and we just put them out on the street? Was it a person that was formerly incarcerated? Is it a person that's suffering from a health condition like substance abuse or mental illness? So you have to address why the person was on the street to begin with. We need a comprehensive response. Now, at the same time as we're trying to move people off the street, we have to prevent the next wave from falling into homelessness. So one of the reasons why people feel like nothing's been done about about this issue. And housing has been built. But for every 200 people they move off the street, 220 more fall into homelessness. So you have to stop it from occurring to begin with. You have to get people off the streets, and then you have to address why they were homeless so they don't fall back into it.
One of the things that connections that I've seen you make in terms of addressing the root causes is foster care. You're very supportive of the foster care system and your work and your action. And how does that influence your approach to homelessness? Like, how does the foster care issues dovetail with the homeless situation?
So let me actually go back a little bit because I started working on foster care. Foster care blew up because of crack. It was the first time in history where there was a drug epidemic that impacted women equal to men. Ooh. That had never happened before. When women get strung out or when women get incarcerated, the families fall apart. Yep. And so that's when, a lot of kids went into the system. Grossly disproportionate Black children. When a child is in danger of abuse or neglect, the majority of kids in foster care are not there for physical abuse or sexual abuse. They're there for neglect, and neglect is usually secondary to substance abuse, mental illness, or abject poverty. All the same things that lead to homelessness. So we take a child away from the family. We break up the family in order to fix the child, which is nonsense, okay? And we support that child for 18 years. And then at age 18, we cut them off and expect for them to survive. So the average young person in foster care couch surfs for 4 months, and then they're on the street. So what I've been trying to do is transform the system. So instead of taking the child away from the family, fix the family.
Exactly.
If it's substance abuse or mental illness, why don't you fix mom or dad?
Services.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
But we take the kid away, and then we pay strangers to take care of the kid.
It's really insane because some people go into foster care just because of the money that they're getting from these children.
That's right.
So you can take that same exact money and put these parents into facilities because, number one, if someone took my child, my mental's done. It's going to be very hard for me to get my life back together if my reason for breathing is taken away from me.
Exactly right. Or how about remove the kid while mom gets well and ask grandma and give grandma some money. So when I first started this at Community Coalition, the grandparents and aunties and uncles were shunned. Now, the county was willing to give money to strangers, but not to relatives. So we organized the grandmothers, picketed the county, protested. Now it's obvious that's what happens now.
Right.
They prioritize supporting families, but it was not that way before.
Right.
Yeah, shout out to all the social workers. I come from a social worker family. My mom is actually the lawyer for DPS right now, so it's like it's very close to my home. For people who really don't get it, can you explain how the abortion ban is an attack on women, specifically poor women who are disproportionately minority women?
Well, let me just tell you, because I believe that women who are well off, even in the states that ban abortions, will continue to get abortions.
Of course they will.
Because they'll just get it done in the doctor's office and nobody's going to know about it. And so it's poor women and, of course, women of color who might need to go to a public facility who doesn't have the Beverly Hills doctor that they can go in and have something done and keep it quiet. So that's why it disproportionately impacts. And then women are not going to stop having abortions.
No.
It's just they're just going to be risking their life in having them. And so this is just a backward move, which is an example to me of how the Republicans' long-term strategy has been to take over the judiciary. And then, we thought we got rid of this guy, a couple of years ago when we booted him out of office. But the profound impact that Trump's presidency has had, not just on this country, but literally in the world. And so the result of that are the 3 judges that he appointed, which is why we're sitting here having this conversation today. Right. And they've made it very clear, this is no longer the Supreme Court. This is the Republican Supreme Court.
Oh, for sure.
Many people on our show, because we lean very hip-hop and we're in L.A., grew up forced to deal with LA gang culture. We don't shun them for how they engage with it, and we tell them, have our stories. And I read the comments in our show, and sometimes people have said, hey, how come y'all don't go harder on the people who talk about their times in gangs? So as mayor, do you have a plan for LA's gang problem?
Yes. Again, that was one of the origins of Community Coalition.
Okay.
And so what we did was we started a youth component called South Central Youth Empowered Through Action. And the whole point of that, I believed that you could work with young people as young as middle school, and you could get them involved in activities so that they don't get involved in gangs. You know, one of my concerns about gangs is, you know, gangs are substitute families, gangs are protection, gangs are businesses, gangs are source of, you know, economic development, and none of that, I believe, is positive, frankly. So how do you create the institutions, the programs, the support so that young people don't have to turn to gangs?
Yes. Now, speaking of gangs, Grim Reapers, Regulators, Vikings, Banditos, these are all LA gangs, all police gangs. They tell the community to snitch, but they hide behind this blue wall of silence. And this is just a small part of why people say defund the police. Uvalde police receive 40% of town's budget, still failed to stop the mass shooting. So you have made statements against defunding the police.
Yes.
How do you plan on holding police more accountable without defunding?
Yeah, well, I think that there's a couple of things. To me, the principle of police reform should be accountability and transparency. And so when I was doing the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, we were able to pass it twice out of the House. It stalled in the Senate. So Senator Booker and I went to the White House and asked the White House if they would do an executive order, which they did, and it was signed a little while ago. In terms of the accountability and transparency that needs to happen in LA, one of the areas is in officer discipline. So voters a few years ago voted for this ballot initiative that created the Citizens Commission that sounded good on paper, but it's actually been its opposite in terms of has not held police officers accountable. So that's one thing that needs to change. Another thing is the pretextual stops, which you know what happens. Like you might have a smash and grab in Beverly Hills, right? And then the police say, well, the culprits came from South LA. And then they cast a net over all young people and use pretextual stops to, you know, suppress an entire population. So I say there's two styles of policing. There's warrior policing, and then there is guardian policing. So my congressional district covers South Central, but it also covers West LA. And you have one police department and two different attitudes. Guardian policing over in West LA, warrior policing in South LA, and you have, and I've talked to officers who've told me that some of the rookies, when they come out of the academy, go, "Hey, I want to kick some butt. I want to go to South LA." That's not. No one would ever say that about West LA.
Right. The Los Angeles Police Protective League, the union that represents police officers, spent $4 million to endorse your opponent, Rick Caruso. Can you offer us some perspective on that?
Sure. They spent $4 million in ads attacking me. They endorsed Caruso, but they attacked me. I think that they did that. Now, I worked with them when I was doing the George Floyd bill. I worked with them. They wanted to know what we were doing. I shared it with them, worked with them, and all that. I think that they don't want me to be mayor because they know that I will move to hold the police accountable. I don't know any other explanation for it.
Yeah, I thought that there was right before, like probably the day before voting, almost every commercial was trashing you. And I'm just like, what the heck is going on?
You know what? I think a number of people said that, which is why I won.
It made me go vote for you.
Because, you know, they spent $4 million. Caruso spent $40 million. More, by the way, was spent by him than any candidate in the country has spent thus far. Wow. That means people running for governor, people running for senator. He outspent them all, and that was just the primary.
How long ago was he a Republican?
I believe he switched right before it, right? He ran for mayor?
The last time he was a Republican was 2019, during Trump's time.
And what are we, 2022?
Then he became an independent. Then 2 weeks before he filed, or 3 weeks, then he became a Democrat.
I see what he's doing.
And that independent was just like a little liaison to try and go to the other side. Like, I don't know what I want to do.
He's trying to be reverse Trump.
Yeah.
Now, Melina Abdullah, Patrice Cullors are people who have been on this show. And we have been in this show on People's Party very supportive of Black Lives Matter. And you have a relationship with them.
I do.
Yes, these are people who you've worked with and you know them. They have wrote a letter or an essay which they disagreed with some of your strategies and tactics and policies. And they said they were calling you in with love as opposed to calling you out, but they were critical of your pragmatism, which is what we spoke about earlier. Black Lives Matter position is that more police never make marginalized people feel safer. You have said that your stance on more police presence and funding is based on going into neighborhoods where the constituents have actually demanded more police. This is the same situation that happened with the Black community in the '94 crime bill. You know, I'm old enough to remember when people in our community were cheering for this and wanting the idea of wanting more police presence.
People called for the National Guard.
Yeah, you know, I remember
Absolutely.
all this. Some experts have pointed out that Black communities generally appear to benefit from larger police departments when it comes to lowering crime rates and all that. But other experts, other data has found that it's not always the case for cities with the largest Black populations and found significant racial disparities and low-level arrests with a lot of Black people getting prosecuted for low-level crimes. So my question is, at what point does a politician go against what people say they want and go with the experts, even if the expert stance is not the popular one?
So let me just be clear, too. And first of all, Melina and Patrice I've known for a long time. I have the utmost respect and love. And along the way, we've had differences. And this is an example of one. What my general concern is that, and I have fought for the last 32 years for criminal justice reform, okay? It's been a long fight. And we are finally to the point where we're actually willing to make some reforms. My concern about our side of the street is we also have to have a response. If somebody robs a bank, what are you supposed to do? If you don't have an answer for that, in my opinion, you have conceded to the right. Because the right will say to you, you see, you just want all hell to break loose. My position is that if a crime happens, you have to deal with the crime. I want to stop the crimes of today, but my focus is on preventing the crimes of tomorrow.
Yes.
So you need to know, when I was saying that those neighborhoods that want a police presence, I was not talking about our communities. I'm running for mayor of the whole city, and there are neighborhoods in the valley who are saying they want to see more police. I think if they want to see more police, they should. But my way of getting them more police is taking the police that are behind the desk, those that can. I mean, some need to stay behind the desk. Taking those police officers and sending them on the beat. In South LA, what I would do is focus on what I know are proven strategies to prevent and reduce crime and reduce violence. Very different requests on different sides of town.
Yeah. It goes back to what is the job of a politician. It's like I imagine there's conflict in moving from activist work to
It is.
being a politician.
Let me just tell you that it was major soul searching because most of my life has been spent on the outside. First time I ran for office, I was in my 50s, okay? So
Right.
majority of my life was not spent there. But it was a conscious decision that I made to go inside. Because when I started the Community Coalition, my goal was to start, build, recruit, and leave. I wanted to pass the baton and move away and let the organization flourish. Because sometimes in our community, we start organizations, they become so identified with us, we never leave. And then when something happens to us, everything falls apart. So I wanted to demonstrate that you didn't have to do things that way. So I made a decision that I basically had the tolerance level where I could go inside. It was a conscious decision. I do believe that the best way to bring about change in this country is to have an inside strategy and an outside strategy. You have to have the activists. You have to have the people on the street. You have to have that pressure to make folks on the inside move.
Yes.
Okay, so I know myself and a lot of my peers were one of the main people who were like, we're going to go for Biden because he is going to eliminate student debt loans. And that's like one of the major things that keeps us from getting cars, from having great credit scores. And it's the gift that keeps on giving, not.
Yeah.
So what is your position on student loan debt forgiveness, and have debt companies exploited the youngest legal sole borrowers, which are 18-year-old students?
Well, I mean, I really think that what has happened to your generation is criminal. I mean, you know, I'm sure, that the federal government makes money off of your loans, billions of dollars. And so to me, I think that the debt should be forgiven. And I think that there's aspects of the student loan industry that's predatory. We were talking about my daughter a few minutes ago. I co-signed a loan for her. And so when she passed away, I had to pay that loan back. But I also worked on legislation that says, if your child dies, you shouldn't have to pay that. No. But so, I think it's predatory. And I think that it is holding your generation back from home ownership. It's one of the reasons why the city is so unaffordable, because you're busy paying debt. So one of the things I want to do around homelessness is that, is to address the workforce. And so my thought is that we could probably recruit social workers and other health providers by offering a subsidy for student loans. So in Congress, what they allow us to do, because Congress notoriously pays staff very little. Mm-hmm. So every member of Congress has a pot of money for student loans. So we meet at the beginning of the year, and I ask my staff how much their loan payment is, and I make those payments for them. So some people come to the Hill and work until their student loans are paid off, and then they leave. I think we should use that model in different areas of work, especially where we need people. Teachers, for example.
I also think that there should be, if they're going to keep on doing these loans, that there should be some kind of classes that educate these students on how to spend the money. Because when I think about all the money that I went through for college, so they encourage you to get loans. I could have had a house, I could have had multiple cars, I could have had multiple investments, and maybe show us how to invest our money rather than saving it for spring break.
I agree. And the other way to do it is not to make college not so expensive.
I know, that's right.
That too.
Speaking of money and and your Congressional Black Caucus work with this group of people. Reagan was the president, but I voted for Shirley Chisholm. That's a Bismarcky lyric. And shout out to Shirley Chisholm, who's one of the founders of the CBC. Mm-hmm. What's your position on reparations and HR 40? And if you're in favor of reparations, what needs to be done to push this idea forward?
We need to get rid of some of the Republicans that are there so we can push the idea forward. California, I think, is going to set a model. Mm-hmm. California had an HR 40 version, and they now have a committee on reparations. And then I think Bruce Beach is a perfect example. Bruce Beach, land that was stolen from a black family here. And so that was land that was stolen. And so, it's now being given back to that family. I actually think that there's a bunch of examples of reparations going on around the country.
Yeah, Illinois has an example, right?
Yeah, and several of the colleges, the Ivy League colleges that made their money off of enslaved folks are now looking for ways, to give back. So unfortunately, yes, I support HR 40, but unfortunately, HR 40 is not going to get to the president's desk because it will never get through the Senate. But, right now, 2 years ago, we were talking about systemic racism with George Floyd, and people were beginning to look at institutional racism. Mm-hmm. For people like me who fought for these issues for a long time, it was thrilling to see now this become a part of popular vocabulary. Right. But the minute we started talking about it, the minute people started questioning U.S. history and the monuments and things like that, then they created, critical race theory and invented that, which is basically a way of saying that we do not want to tell the truth about U.S. history. Right. We're worried about white children being injured emotionally. Right. What about the emotional injury of your people didn't even exist and contributed nothing to this country? Yeah. How about that emotional injury?
Yeah, and just the idea that they are removing things like the narrative of Frederick Douglass out of schools right now. That's very scary to me.
Well, that goes back to when you were making the Nazi comparison, which is essentially fascism. And one of the ways fascism expresses itself is the suppression of information. The only thing they haven't done is set books on fire.
That's right. But
they've banned them.
And I feel like if we look hard enough, we could probably find examples of book burning happening right now.
Yes,
that's how it feels. A quote of yours just that I wrote down that reminded me of what you just said is, Congress can take 10 days or 10 years to pass a piece of legislation. A lot of it determines a lot of what determines the difference is the urgency that Congress feels.
Right. And so that's the inside-outside strategy. So in other words, when 100,000 people were out on the streets every day after George Floyd's torture and murder, I was really trying to get the bill done because I knew that, eventually it was going to wane. And if we didn't get that bill done while all those people were on the street, we were not going to be successful. Right. So we have got to be more sophisticated, I think, activists outside to strategically time that stuff so that lawmakers are pressured to make the change.
Yes.
Right now, floating around in meme country is the fact that guns have more rights than women's bodies.
Yeah.
You work with Moms Demand Action for gun law reform. What needs to be done effectively to stand up to the gun lobby?
It's sad because the majority of Americans, including gun owners, including NRA members, support gun control. And people look at the gun lobby and think that it's about campaign contributions. It's not campaign contributions like money to the candidate. It's the independent efforts, like what you saw with PPL. That was an independent effort. That's when they come and attack you. And I was hoping that the NRA was, and they still might be in trouble organizationally. Bottom line is they need to be disbanded. That would go a long way. But the NRA doesn't really represent gun owners. It represents the industry, the manufacturing of guns. I mean, you can imagine the rest of the world, we look crazy.
I mean, because people think they're trying to take their guns, and it's like, no, but you do not need any kind of automatic weapon on the streets. Like, there's just no need for it.
Did you hear, and it was so painful to hear about how, I didn't realize this with an AR-15, that it just destroys the body.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, they had to get DNA samples because they couldn't figure out who the kids were. That's just...
I mean, that's so savage to me. And
savage. That's a good word.
Yeah, I saw a photo of the recent NRA conference, which they had the numbers were way lower than they expected. So I'm hoping that's a good sign. But the sign when you walked in was all the different guns that you could not bring into their conference.
Right.
So they understand when it's time for gun control. They get it. They get that there's times where you shouldn't have that.
Oh, Jesus, that's crazy.
And for the people that push back, these are regular people that are going into Walmart and stuff and getting these guns.
Exactly. I mean, they have lots of excuses. The excuse that really burns me up in Congress is that it's a mental health problem.
Yeah.
Especially if it's a white person committing a mass murder. If it was a Muslim person, they wouldn't be crying mental health.
That's right. Every country on the planet has people with mental health issues.
Exactly.
Every country doesn't have our gun problem.
There's one country that does, and that's us.
Yeah.
And so it makes me mad when my Republican colleagues will shout mental health, because I'm like, okay, good, I'm down with that. Let's put some money in it. Well, we can't do that. So then you don't really care about mental health.
Right. Well, I would like to thank you for your time and your energy and gracing us with your presence and answering our questions.
Sure.
I do have one more question that I have to ask. I want to shout out Black Voters Matter. I think that's a great organization. I used to be famously vocal about how I didn't vote and didn't trust the two-party system. I remember I did Jared, you remember this? I did the cover of some magazine. It was me and Al Sharpton. And it was like, they had us like back to back and we were arguing over whether or not to vote.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is and my whole thing was I never was trying to convince other people not to vote. I just felt like for me, I didn't trust the two-party system.
Yeah.
I thought there was too much money in politics.
Yep.
And I didn't see anything in mainstream politics at all that looked like anything that I would want to get behind. So how would you convince someone who feels the system is so broken that they shouldn't vote, that voting can work as a useful tool for liberation?
Well, I just feel like if you don't, then you've just conceded. You've just conceded to all the forces that you're against. You've just handed them all the power.
Well, now let me say to that point, in my argument, now I've changed my stance.
You vote now.
I vote now. And I support voting. And I read this book that came out on Malcolm X a couple years ago, because he's a hero of mine, and a reinvention of Malcolm X, I think was the name of the book. And it talked in depth about Malcolm's relationship with Adam Clayton Powell, and and the Ballad of the Bullet, and Malcolm. And people around him, they used the vote as a tool.
Right.
It wasn't just the only thing. You're not a revolutionary just because you vote.
Absolutely.
But it can be used, and that changed my perspective on it. But a lot of people my age and younger just have given up on it.
Yep.
They don't see the point in it at all.
But you know what, though? I feel that it's my responsibility as an elected official, and even if I wasn't an elected official, but an activist, it's my responsibility to bring you back.
Right.
And to say, look, don't give your power away.
Right.
Don't let them stomp on us, because
Right.
that's essentially, when you concede like that, you're basically saying, then just run over me.
See, now I didn't actually, that was my caveat back then. I would say, I don't vote, but I'm also not here. I'm not going to complain about what's going on in government. I was still doing activist work. I was still active in the community. I just didn't feel like my vote had any power. And that's where I'm at with it now. And I want to get your opinion on this. I try not to judge anybody at all. But if someone tells me that they don't vote, my response to that is like, okay, cool, but what do you do?
Right.
How are you active?
Right.
Because if you're telling me you don't vote and you're still complaining, then yeah, you sound crazy to me.
Right. Well, the other thing too about voting is it's about resource allocation as well. So not only do I not want to give my power away, I need the resources to help my people. So,
Yeah.
But I do think it's my responsibility to show folks why you need to vote. And it's like, I ain't in love with the two parties either.
Right.
And I do think our system is corrupt,
Right.
especially around money. But the question is, okay, all of that's fine, but those folks are in a tent out there. So my righteous stand does not help the people in the tents.
That's right. Well, we appreciate you. Thank you for coming through.
Appreciate you. Appreciate you too.
Ladies and gentlemen, Karen Bass, on the People Reporter.